Once again, it's good to see each of you here tonight. If you have your Bibles, we're going to be in the book of Esther, chapter number 5. Esther, chapter number 5. If you remember, last week we went through chapter 4, and we saw that we've seen that there's been a decree issued by Ahasuerus on behalf, really, of Haman. And Haman is the one that put all this together, and so Ahasuerus agreed to it. The decree was to kill all the Jews in the area. That was, and all this stemmed because Haman is upset at who? Mordecai. He's upset because Mordecai, he doesn't feel, is respecting him and showing him the proper reverence and, all this, and so that's what all of this has stemmed from. And so last week, as we got into chapter 4, we found that Mordecai was out in the middle of the city, and he had covered himself in sackcloth and ashes, and he was just mourning over this. And part of the reason that he's mourning is because this is a decree that once it's issued, typically does not change. It is what it is, and so all the Jews, the Bible tells us, were mourning as well because they got the decree. People in Persia were confused. They don't understand. Why are we, why is this decree coming out against a people that have really not done anything to us? And so all of this is going on. And then, Esther, she ends up communicating through a third party with Mordecai. And Mordecai now instructs her that she needs to go in before the king. And she needs to talk to him. She needs to deal with this. She needs to try to get this thing fixed and let him know that, that this is Haman, and to make sure that he understands. We've talked about it a little bit, that undoubtedly Ahasuerus really has no idea what he's agreed to. And that's always dangerous, isn't it? When you agree to something, you better know what you've agreed to. Let's just read all the paperwork, read the fine print. That's I always thought it was funny as a kid that you'd get to the end of a commercial and they'd have I think it was the same guy, it may not have been. Used to be the guy from the Micro Machines. Y'all remember those? No? Some of you do, some of you don't. Anyway, there was a guy that he talked really, really fast, and he would read all that fine print just as fast. You couldn't understand a word he was saying. But you make sure you read the fine print. But Ahasuerus had not he didn't read the fine print. He didn't know what was going on. He just took Haman's thought and his idea and his plan and said, hey, even gave him his ring, right? Let him sign off on it for him. Let him sign the check. And so all this is going on, and so you can imagine Esther's a little concerned. What is Esther's concern? She might get killed. Because you didn't go into the king, you had to be requested to come into his presence. And so she tells Mordecai that. She says, listen, you know that I can't just walk in there. Even though she's the queen, she is his wife, she cannot just walk herself in there. And so, without him asking. Or she could take the chance and she could walk in there and hope that he was okay with it. And whenever he was okay with it, how would he signify? He would extend the scepter and welcome her in. And so, it was a chance, and we talked about it last week. It's like playing Russian roulette. You don't know. And I'm just going to tell you, just from what we know about Ahasuerus, listen, you better hope he's in a good mood. right? Better hope he's in a good mood, or otherwise it's not going to matter, And so, but then Mordecai, after he hears that, he reminds her, hey, listen, here's what you need to understand. You've been put where you are for such a time as this. Because God's going to take care of his people with or without you doing what you're supposed to do. God's going to take care of them. He's going to get this thing done with or without you. Can I tell you that God's will is going to get done with or without you or me? We can either be obedient and willing and do what he asks us to do, or we can choose not to, and he will find somebody else. He will find somebody else. It's not, we're not his last chance or his last hope. And so Mordecai reminds her. So then Esther, her reply to him is, pray for me. Pray for me. Get all the people to pray for me. I'm just going to tell you, if God puts you somewhere and calls you to do something and you're scared to death, best thing you can do is just ask folks to pray for you. Just pray for you. Lift me up in prayer. Ask God to be with me, to guide me. And so that brings us to chapter number 5 at verse number 1. We're going to read down through verse number 5 starting out. It says, now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house, over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. Are you confused on where they're at? I am. I can't even vision that. I can't visualize that. And it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. And so Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, what wilt thou, Queen Esther? And what is thy request? It shall be given thee to the half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther hath said. And so the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So here we find Esther has invited Ahasuerus and Haman to a banquet. She's invited them to a banquet, and so she puts on her royal robes and stands in the inner courts of the king's palace. And so I'm just going to be honest with you. Right there, she has shown a ton of courage. A ton of courage. To know that, again, if he does not welcome her, then she's probably going to die. She's going to probably die. And so, she showed courage in her willingness to appear before Ahasuerus without being summoned by him. And, not only does it take good courage, here's the thing, okay? So she knows what could happen. But add on top of that, what type of reputation does Ahasuerus have with his wives? Not good. Not real good. So she has all of that, and so you can imagine those thoughts are running through her mind about what's going to happen, and all this, and she's worried about it. And so, she comes in, and he welcomes her. Not sure, what his thoughts were as to why she was there, but obviously she comes in, he welcomes her, and so he asks her, what can I do for you? What's your request? And so Esther says, hey, if it's okay with you, if it would be all right with you, why don't you and Haman come to this banquet that I have prepared for you. Now, she didn't, did you notice anything about that? Did she say anything about the decree? Hadn't said anything about the decree yet. What's her purpose for being there? To talk about the decree, right? But again, we have to always go back and look at timing, right? Mordecai had told her time and time again, going into this thing, not to tell them that she was a Jew. Don't say anything about that. It's not the time. So now she's to come in and she's to talk to him about this. But she comes in and he says, hey, what's your request? And she does not say, hey, stop the decree. Put an end to it. Those are my people. No, that's not how it worked. But instead she says, hey, I've prepared a banquet for you. Why don't you and Haman come to this banquet that I've prepared for you? And so, again, she shows, she delays a little bit, and that's okay. Sometimes one of the worst things we can do is just I understand there's some people you just have to be upfront with, right? Some folks you just have to say, hey, this is what I'm trying to tell you. Some folks you have to ease into it. But so here, obviously she knows the kind of man that Haman is, or Ahasuerus is, and so she, she doesn't come in and blurt out her ultimate request right away. She wants to finish. She's wanting to gain his confidence in her, and she wants Haman at the banquet. My personal opinion is that she wants him there to expose his wickedness. I think we can learn something from that. Not necessarily just trying to expose people's wickedness, but, listen, if you're going to talk about somebody, make sure they're there when you talk about them, right? I'm not telling you it's okay to talk about people, but if there's a problem, worst thing you can do is go run off behind their back and tell them, have them there. Esther said, hey, I want you and Haman here. I want you and him here to know. And so she invites him. So then we move down to verse number 6. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, my petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king hath said. So Haman and Ahasuerus come to they gather together, they come to this first banquet, and so they're there, and what does Ahasuerus say? What do you want? What can I do for you? What's your petition? What's your request? And he tells her, he says, hey, listen, I will grant your request. And he uses a phrase there when he says that he will grant her request up to half of the kingdom. Now, he's not really offering her half of the kingdom. He's just basically saying, listen, whatever it is that you want. Here I am I'm willing to, this is a proverbial expression, if you will. And so he asked her and he uses that expression. And she said, and I don't know how you are if you read this or studied this, but as you're reading it, you see him ask, what is your petition? And so then she says, my request is, and you're kind of like, oh, here it comes. Here it comes. And she doesn't ask again. Instead, she says, all right, listen. If it pleases you, let me make you another banquet tomorrow. So obviously, she didn't feel like it was the right time. She didn't feel like that they were there. And so, she lets him know that she would like for him and Haman to come to the banquet on the next day. And again, puts it off for one more day, promising to reveal her request at a second banquet on the next day. And, there's a lot of things. We can sit here and look at this and we can say, well, maybe she just maybe her courage was not there yet. Maybe she just was not, she's using this as a way of delaying. And, let me just tell you again, sometimes that's how it's got to be. I can tell you there's been times where I really felt led to talk to somebody about the Lord, but just the first time that I had the first time I was with them, second time, third time, it just was not there yet. Sometimes you have to build those relationships. You have to do that, and I can't help but to think that Esther is really trying to get a feel for this thing and make sure that when she makes her request, she's already dodged one bullet in a sense, right? By coming into him unannounced and unrequested. And so, here she is. And so she puts it off one more day. And then we move down into verse number 9. Then went Haman forth that day, joyful and with a glad heart. Oh, the king and his queen have invited him and him alone to a banquet. Not once, but twice. So he's going away. You can just see him. He's, we already know the kind of person that he is, and so he just thinks that he is too hot to trot, and he is going on. And so it says, but when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, here we go. When Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Man, did things change for Haman real quick there? Yeah. He went from being joyful and happy and glad to all of a sudden he's walking through the palace and he comes to the king's gate, and who is there? Mordecai. Mordecai is there. And Mordecai does not stand up in reverence to Haman. And Mordecai does not move out of his way. And so now it tells us here that Haman, when you look at it, verse number 9, that he was full of indignation. Mordecai. How's he feeling now? What's Haman feeling now? Is he still joyful and glad? And he is angry. Can I tell you, that is a miserable, miserable man. Honored by both the king and the queen of Persia. And yet the disapproval of one man makes him feel worthless. One man. One person. Can I tell you, y'all have any thoughts on that? Again, a man honored by the king and the queen of Persia. And yet one man not honoring him, not approving of him, not giving him the respect that he feels he deserves, and he's going to allow it to consume him. Y'all have any thoughts on that? No? Should have turned his head and went on. What was that? He can't be happy with nothing. You're right. He should have. He should have just said, you know what? I'm not going to let him, I'm not giving him the time of day. I tell you, whenever we look at this, can I tell you that this is an accurate description of just how empty the rewards of this world are? Empty. He's looking, also a very good and accurate description of whenever we're seeking our joy from the wrong place. right? Whenever we are, when we're looking after and trying to get our, we're trying to get our joy from worldly things and trying to get the approval of men. Pride, absolutely. He was definitely a very prideful man. And I think that's, y'all correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I do think that pride is a major part in us wanting and seeking man's approval. I think that's a big part of it, is our pride. Because what happens whenever somebody doesn't approve of us or somebody doesn't like us, that we want to like us? We kind of walk around pouting and just want them to like me. Just want to be friends. And isn't it amazing that that's something that starts at a young age? You know, when you get left out on the playground, or like me, you're the last one picked on the basketball court. Yeah. It hurts our feelings. It gets us upset. And so that's exactly, Haman is kind of like a little kid here. He is looking, and this guy, he just looks at him wrong. I mean, should it have made a difference to him whether or not Mordecai stood up in reverence? No. But when it becomes all about me, something that little becomes something very big. And it has. And so he just goes from went forth that day joyful and with a glad heart to being full of indignation, anger against Mordecai. Verse number 10, nevertheless, Haman refrained himself. Well, practice some self-control there. He refrained himself. And when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him and how he had advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. So Haman controls himself, and he doesn't go off on Mordecai. He keeps on walking, but he's still filled with indignation. And so he goes home, and he calls all of his friends in. And I don't know about you, but this to me is a little bit of a flashback on a smaller scale of what Ahasuerus is doing whenever we first began reading in the book of Esther. He calls all of his friends in, and his wife comes in. And he tells them about all that he's got, his riches, the promotion that I've been given from the king. Let me tell you all about what I've got. Let me tell you about all these, he wants to show off and tell about all these things. And, nothing wrong with bragging on God about things you have. But make sure you give credit where credit's due. Right? So here he comes, and he ain't giving anybody credit. He just talks about the king has done this and done that. And, he has advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. So he's just second in command. He is the king's right-hand man. And Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself. And tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Do you see that? The king has done all of this. Oh, and by the way, here he talks about why, remember when he left with a heart that was full of gladness and joy? Yeah. So he says, and Esther invited me to a banquet with just the king and myself and her, the banquet that she had prepared for him. And tomorrow I get to go to another one. And so he's excited about these things. He's bragging about all these things. But he can't stop there. Can't stop there. Look at verse 13. Yet. Uh-oh. Talk about all this good stuff. All the great things that have happened. That yet really is just another, you could plug the word but in there. You know, somebody asks you how you doing. I'm doing really, really good. But you ever met anybody like that? Doesn't matter what's going on. Doesn't matter how everything really has been going on. They're always going to have something on the other side of that good side. You're going to have all the good things, and then there's going to be a but, followed by all the negative. That's Haman right here. He says, yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Now that's a sad statement. That is a sad statement. Again, he says all of this is good, but as long as I continue to see Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, it don't matter. All that's worthless. Really? So you're willing to let one person destroy and ruin everything else? Can I tell you, sometimes people in church do that. We'll let one person may have upset us. They may have offended us somewhere along the lines. And we're not going to be happy as long as they're around. Be careful about that. Because I think when we do that too, we're putting our joy or our trust and our happiness in the hands of the wrong person. Amen. My joy don't come from any individual. My joy comes from the Lord. Amen. And so Haman says, hey, it's no good to me as long as Mordecai is sitting at the gate. And then you get down to verse number 14. It says, then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high. And tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou in merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Well, we've already seen in times past, it's just like this thing just keeps repeating itself, that when you take advice from the wrong people, it creates more problems a lot of times, don't it? Bad advice is dangerous. So Haman tells him this to his friends, and his wife says, listen, why don't you build some big old gallows? And now, by the way, this is not we've talked about this. This is not the gallows that typically, and some people have it mistaken, but I think that even history proves that this was not for hanging. These were stakes that somebody would be placed on, pulled down by their legs until the stake came up out the top. It had a sharp point, you get it. So they said, why don't you build a gallows? They even say make it big enough where it can be seen from a far distance. And when you go tomorrow, go to the king and tell him that this is what you want. So he does. He likes it. He likes this idea. Because who does it make happy? Him. This is, in his eyes, this is a solution to remove that one thing that bothers him. Life's good, but Mordecai. That's Haman. Life's great, but Mordecai. Could you imagine if he had just learned to ignore Mordecai? Mordecai, I mean, it is what it is. He had his reasons for not wanting to do what he was doing. Was he wrong for it? I don't think so. But he had his reason. Haman had his reason why he felt like he should have. Well, guess what? You both can argue till you're blue in the face about who's right and who's wrong, but in the end, you're just going to have to agree to disagree. Sometimes we just have to learn to agree to disagree with some folks. Move on. But as if it wasn't enough that he had already gotten this decree, put out that, he wants the execution of Mordecai, and he's going to ask for it at the execution, at the banquet the next day. And, so again, it's not just enough to punish Mordecai's people, or merely even just to kill Mordecai. They didn't say, well, you want us to go take care of him? They didn't even say that. They wanted Haman to ask for a public, humiliating execution of Mordecai. Because, of course, that's what's going to bring him happiness, right? That's what's going to bring him joy. Wrong. Listen, we were created in a way that there's only one thing that will bring us true joy and true happiness and true peace. And that's a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. That's it. Which, by the way, it appears that's something that Haman is missing. Which is why his joy was circumstantial. As long as he was with the king and at the banquet, and it was him and the king, everything was good. But he sees Mordecai and everything's bad. He talks to his family and he tells them all the good, but there's this one thing. That's Mordecai. Listen, we need to make sure we know where true joy comes from. True joy comes from the Lord. We don't need to be looking to this world for satisfaction. We don't need to be looking to this world for approval. We don't need to be looking to this world for recognition, because I'm just telling you, more times than not, you will be disappointed. And it can, and listen, when disappointment arises, however you deal with that can determine a lot of things. It can create bitterness, create anger, hatred, all from one thing. That if you just said, you know what, it's okay. They may not approve of me. They may not like me. They may not give me respect. They may not want to agree with everything that I agree with, but that's okay, because the Lord loves me. The Lord respects me. The Lord cares for me. He thinks I'm important. Right? That's what we got to make sure, that we're looking in the right places, because I'm going to tell you, if we're not, we'll get ourselves in trouble. And so Mordecai has the gallows made. Don't ever underestimate the destructive and the distorting power of hatred. Hatred is dangerous, and can I tell you that, the same irrational, violent hatred that made Haman want to see Mordecai hang on that gallows to his death is the same irrational, violent hatred that made man want to see Jesus hang on a cross. It's the same thing. The same hatred, the same violence that Haman had towards Mordecai. It's the same thing that made people say, you know what, see that man right there? We don't like him. He teaches something different than what we're accustomed to. Something different than what our family may have taught us. We don't like him. Hadn't done anything wrong. We can't find fault in him. But we don't like him. Oh, and he answers all of our questions, by the way. And asks us questions that we don't have answers to. But we don't like him. So we want to see him die. Same hatred. Be careful, because hatred is dangerous, isn't it? When you allow that seed to be planted there, I'm going to tell you, it grows, and it grows, and it grows. And if you don't deal with it and get it out at the root, it could become something that you don't want it to be. Amen. Anybody have any thoughts, comments, or questions tonight?